I may sound a bit critical, but it is meant in a spirit of constructive criticism. I'm sure my ESD and environmental education colleagues have valid concerns about climate change education, like the fact that sometimes we focus too narrowly on carbon, as if carbon were an enemy to be defeated, when of course we are all carbon-based life forms that can trace our lineage to the dust of stars. All three of our domains have had to counter the perception that we are training eco-warriors, social justice advocates, and climate activists. And maybe we are. Maybe that's exactly what we need to be doing. But we've also had to counter the critique of education advocates who tell us that critical thinking skills, not mastery about specific topics, is what's really important. They will say it's not really important whether somebody understands the greenhouse effect or not. What's important is that they know how to think critically. But I would argue that this approach has given us too many smart idiots who can criticize brilliantly, but who can also come up with excuses, denying the urgency of informed action to reduce risks and maximize societal and ecosystem resilience. Yes, we must teach discernment, how to separate fact from fiction, truth from lies, yes, good from evil, but especially around environmentally and socially sustainable practices. And perhaps what we mean here is survivability, not sustainability. Critical thinking is not enough. We need to have a basic understanding of the context of the crisis, of the urgency to act, if we are going to be able to respond appropriately. Without such understanding, how can informed decisions be made? Fortunately, we now have clear evidence on the impacts of effective educational engagement from researchers who have shown that while information alone is not enough to motivate behavior change, when knowledge is paired with affective, research-based pedagogy communicated by trusted messengers, action, measurable changes in attitudes and behavior can and often does occur. Finally, as educators, we also need to acknowledge that there is a dark shadow side to general education, especially secondary and above, and even more especially in the developed world. The more educated people are, the more energy and resources they tend to consume, and the greater the impact they have on our planetary boundaries. And of course, that includes most of us who are well educated. We're among the top 10% of emitters on the planet, at least most of us are at this conference. The top 10% of emitters are responsible for nearly half the global emissions. So let's not forget that most of the people on the planet don't fly in airplanes, they don't own cars, they don't have many consumer choices. We are privileged, and I know that as a community we recognize how fortunate we are. But all of us in the enterprise of education need to acknowledge that as it is now configured, usually with little or no environmental education and education for sustainable development and or climate change education, modern education has ironically become a major part of the problem facing the planet. And yet as educators, we know the potential and power of education. We know that if it is authentic, if it is down to earth, if it touches people's hearts and minds, it is the key to transforming the world. That's where the sweet spot of our Venn diagram linking these three realms is so important. But what exactly is this sweet spot? Where do environmental education, education for sustainable development, and climate change education really merge together and become more than the sum of their parts? What is the synthesis of our collective insights and strengths? To me, it is clear. The sweet spot is where we all have a shared vision of fostering and demonstrating low-impact, safe, sustainable, socially just, high-quality lifestyles, livelihoods, and communities. But how do we show what these lifestyles, livelihoods, and communities look like? This must be more than theory, more than ideas on paper or words floating in the ether. We need actual physical demonstrations of sustainable practices and low-impact lifestyles and careers. And yes, there are some examples, such as hubs and hives of sustainability here and there. In North America, there's a big movement on college campuses to transform the academy into living laboratories. Perhaps one of the action items from this conference is to put together a database of all these existing hubs and hives of sustainable practices around the world and help connect them all together. But we need many more such demonstrations in community learning centers. at least one in every community of 100,000 people, ideally one in every neighborhood, every village, physical places where people can go and learn and share in their own language, in the context of their own culture and climate, about sustaining ourselves and our environment, about reducing risks and increasing resilience. This is not pie-in-the-sky utopian dreaming, I would suggest. It is simple needs assessment, our collective imperative. We urgently need real-world demonstrations of sustainable, affordable living solutions, localized for the community but globally networked, informed and shaped by our knowledge, know-how, and passion. This is how sustainability, survivability education, if you will, can be the synthesis of these three overlapping, sometimes conflicting domains. Thank you for this opportunity to share a few thoughts as we try to protect and preserve the operating systems on Spaceship Earth. I look forward to learning more about the outputs and recommendations of your important conference. Thank you again.
You know, since there are fewer people here, we have to clap much louder. There you go.
So thank you for this. Now I request Professor Ashok Kumar to say a few words from his experience on ESD.
Well, I'm going to talk about sustainability education at master's or MBA level. It's a little bit unique from the standpoint of this conference because a lot of people are talking about kindergarten to 12th level, and this is different. But I still think that it's extremely important to talk about this simply because the MBAs that we prepare or create today, they are the future managers of businesses. And businesses, if not properly controlled, they can be the huge polluters. We know that. So it is most important to change their mindset. So can we design a sustainability education at baccalaureate level or at MBA level where we change the mindset of these executives so that they behave in a way so that the business world is consistent with principles of sustainability. Now, how do we do that? One of the things is there's a new paradigm of competition that's called triple bottom line. I'm sure all of you know about that. Now, triple bottom line actually is not just a pie in the sky. Triple bottom line says that if you build environmental values and social/community values in your policies, in your strategies, in your operations, so if your products are better environmentally, then general thinking is that your profits will go down. But quite to the contrary, the smart companies and smart managers have shown that actually this could be synergistic. If there is a proper design of business computational principles, then more environmental value could actually add to the profit value. That's what is actually at the base of this education. That's how I look at it. There are other ways. I find these master's students come with a mindset and they are not very eager to listen to their professors. But there are ways to change these skeptical minds. Another thing that generally I show a slide where the 10 top green companies are also 10 top most profitable companies. That changes their mind. Sometimes we show the remarks or comments from some of the top business people who have now said that companies who do not take care of environment will not survive tomorrow. And these are the people the students and the people who are in search of good education, they would listen. So I think this is an important area. A business role can be changed from polluter to savior. We have accomplished a lot, trust me. Now, I studied, well, it's a wrong word. I looked at about, let's say, 100 and plus programs. At the core of these sustainability programs, they are all the same. There's not too much difference. Whether you look at Harvard program or Stanford or Grand Valley State, where I come from, the core of sustainability courses are not that different. What is different is actually the actual outcomes when you create the modules that surround the sustainability teaching. So I believe in creating a program, and if you want, I will email my presentation, which I'm not making here. We have a core of sustainability, but around that, we need to have every module, whether it is supply chain, whether it is operations, whether it is marketing, sales, whatever module in a business, all must really completely match with the message of sustainability. That's, again, a huge challenge. And again, I would refer to a book by my expert, but we have done a lot of brainstorming on that. We have actually identified what are exactly the problems in each module that interacts within the business framework, and what are the solutions. And then the distillation of all this is what is the call for action features. So in each module, we need to address what is a kind of central challenge that we must respond to. So the entire holistic design of this Masters in Sustainability really needs a percolation of sustainability in all the modules of business. And this is like what happened to quality in 70s and 80s till really Japanese kicked their, whatever you call it, and got a lot of benefits and share market share and so on. So what I'm trying to say, sustainability education has to be a holistic education, especially in the business area. It must percolate down to every single module. And also, lastly, I would say all these modules must be dynamic. Dynamic means sustainability world is really evolving. So can we do with static principles or decisions that are taken today? Even in simple distribution systems, if you take how you allocate the inventory. Now, either you can, I'm so sorry, either you can decide all the allocation to all the retailers on the route today, or you can decide to allocate as you reach there. You will have the benefit of more knowledge of demand. That means you have reduced uncertainty. So a lot of operational supply chain modules, marketing modules, they must be dealing with uncertainty in a very, very judicious manner. So you are very welcome to write to me and ask for what are our holistic vision for MBA teaching. And I know I've already taken more time than I should, so I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much. I think that was a great introduction to thinking about the cycle of products and how this whole economy and business should work. And I think there is also a great role of us to demand this on every single product and every single thing that we can make the cycle also sustainable. It will not happen without our power and this what we demand from. And I would like to ask if we have Professor Daniela Tilbury online, and we should go, or we should continue with the panelists here.
We saw her.
Yeah, we saw her before, but I don't know if she's still there. Sorry? Is she there? Should we? No, okay. So I would like to ask the next presenter, Professor Mark McFarlane, no, it was, sorry, Dr. Gautam Kumar Dalpati, to say, yeah, okay. And then if we can request to open his presentation for a moment.
Okay. Well, a little bit late is okay.
Hello. Thank you. So I'll just start with what our professor actually just now left, the development of product of sustainable. So whenever we're talking about sustainability, so being a professor or being a scientist, I'll go a little bit about innovation. So we need innovation to develop sustainability, or we need innovation to make people sustainable. So that the innovation play a key role. So I'll go through here some of the key points. Since morning we are doing, so one of the key points we know, for sustainable environment, we have to think about warming, global warming. So we know the warming, but may not be people must aware about warming, what's happening and how it's happening. We know global warming happening, we know the weather temperature is changing. So now because of what? Why are we getting this problem? So how to solve this one? So it will come awareness. At the same time, we have to find out the solution where we can make this minimized. So that I'll go through also the challenges and opportunity, and I'll touch some how we can save our energy to save environmental. If you save energy, you can save environmental. Just one example, if you put your aircon instead of 22, instead of 24, you just put 25, you can find out every year you have saved so much of money. And you can save so much of electricity, because this global warming, nothing but it will destroy everybody. It will not destroy only animal, it will destroy us. It's already started few years back in Chennai, sudden rain in winter. You get already Amazon forest already burning, and this burning is not in localized, it's everywhere happening because the temperature of the earth is increasing, and that one of the reason is carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide coming from where? Because we're creating the electricity from most of the coal and oil. And why? Because this electricity we need for our comfortness or for our survival. If you look, 100 out of 100%, 40% of electricity is required for the comfortment, either for aircon or for heater. It's mainly used for the residential building. So we need to find out the passive way, like passive income. We talk about already passive income. So we have to find out passive way how to save energy so that we can reduce this aircon usage. We may need aircon, but instead of 22, let's make it 25, and you will realize how much you can save your money and how much you can save the environmental. So that is one of the points we need to know. At the same time, we also need to know this renewable energy, which is now very useless, because now maybe whatever the total energy we are using, we're using only 1 or 2%. Make it 50%, making 100%. How it's happened? It can be happened through your innovation. There is a solar cell, but it's very costly, so that we are not putting rooftop. Or we can put, but our awareness or our mentality is not, because it is 1 lakh for 1 kilowatt, whereas you are spending 10 lakh for car, but we are not ready to pay 1 lakh for 1 kilowatt rooftop solar cell, which can help a lot of in terms of saving energy. So we need to change our mindset, and we need to know why we need to put this one. So there are some materials is there which can reduce the price exemption significantly, so that common people can use. One of the innovation I'm working last 15 years in Singapore before moving the Amravati, what actually called passive heating or passive cooling. So which is basically, there is one video, but because of the time I will not show the video. We develop some coating which can reduce your temperature more than 15 degrees centigrade without any energy. It's a passive coating. There are in the market, there are product is there, but 1 meter by 1 meter glass costs 10,000 rupees. So even super rich people, they not agree to put this type of passive coating in the building. Whereas we are coming through innovation, this type of product, we are reduce the price around 3,000 for 1 meter or 1 meter, so that common people, the mass of the people can use this type of coating in glass or even in concrete building, so that your effective temperature of the building is reduced. So the education is required, awareness is required, at the same time innovation is required. Since we have a time limit, I'm not showing the video, but if anybody interested, we can show. This is a live demonstration. So another one, before I end, I want to show one thing. We need education or we need innovation for sustainability, at the same time for people. If you look, the temperature in India and outside India is touching 50 or even some places 55. Those with the car, with the aircon, they are not suffer much. But those people, the farmer, the traffic police, the soldier, the auto driver, if they go 50 degrees centigrade with the hot air, which is called thermal shock, so many people die. So recently, we have come through some idea, sorry for my own picture, we are developing some product which is we call air cool, so that if you put in your ear, it will protect your hot air. At the same time, this product will reduce the temperature below the ear, so that it will be at least 5 to 10 degree lower. If the outside temperature 45, you can feel at least 35. And this type of product not only help of the poor people or common people, it can help anybody who are going under sun. And we need this type of innovation. Make it simple, make it, no need the rocket break science, make it simple, make for the people and make for the society, so that we can have our own earth, own environmental, so that we can live for now, live for generation next. Thank you very much, and I taking for 24 seconds extra.
Thank you very much. I think it was great that we had two presentations related to business, and that shows us also that how important aspect of talking about education for sustainable development is looking into business development as well, because they are integral parts of our life. We don't want to turn ourselves to the Stone Age and live without any facilities, even of this that we can see our presentations now online. So we have to think about the most sustainable ways that are possible to develop it. And now we turn again to education, and education for youth and students. And I would like to go to Mr. Rajendra Sen, Dr. Rajendra Sen, to ask that I heard about the network of global universities, Smart Campus and Cloud Network being promoted by your organization. How is it different from other eco-campus, eco-sustainable campus and green campuses that were mentioned also before? Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for that very pertinent question. Since morning, we have been hearing about green campus, sustainability, education, sustainability for education, and I'm sure everybody is probably after the nice lunch is confused about where we are going. And before we start answering your question, let me thank Dr. Pradeep Burman, as well as my friend Rambuj, for inviting me here to give a brief on this. You must have seen in the morning when the Minister of Environment, India, Prakash Javadekar, talked about smart campus. I think the smart part of the campus comes from a very specific dimension. The green campus, I don't think I have to tell you anything about it, is an environmentally friendly campus with a lot of green vegetation, good trees, nice landscape, thus can be defined as a green campus. The sustainable campus is where the resource optimization takes place, where your energy is optimized, water is conserved, waste is minimized. Those are the kind of things where you have what is called as a sustainable campus, which is also a green campus. The smart campus is where you have the green dimension, you have a sustainable dimension, but you are utilizing the modern technology, the digital technology, to achieve those final goals. And there is a tremendous amount of interest of the students and the faculty to do it that way. And I would like to answer the question which Dr. Eric Barucha asked in the morning. He asked the panel, what is that single point that triggers the transformation within the education system or within a campus towards the sustainability? And according to me, the single trigger point may not be exclusive. There may be other points as well. But the one point which is prominent is that the students wouldn't like to work only on sustainability, but would like to work on that dimension of sustainability which puts them ahead in their employability. We have a McKinsey report which says 50% of the Indian students, the graduates, are not employable. And then comes those who already take an interview from the private sector. We say it is not 50%, it's a 94%. And that is because the education is not keeping a pace with the technology development. Same thing should happen with sustainable development education. It should keep a pace with what market requires. And that is the digital technology integrated with the actions on sustainable development. That brings me to the Smart Campus Cloud Network, which is a global network of universities, which works in a campus on resource optimization, which each activity is linked to a specific SDGs out of 17, not all 17, but there are specific which are related to the education, for related to the water, related to the clean energy, etc. So that is the way of getting the education on SDG by doing it, not by listening to the classroom courses or by just listening to the MOOCs, but actually carrying out the work. And when he carries out this work with Internet of Things, with robotics, with cloud networking, with big data, then the student gets probably a confidence that his employability in the market improves, because he doesn't want to spend time in just attending the conferences on sustainability education. He wants to spend a time for his well-being, which comes from the good employability of his. And I think we should give that kind of an opportunity to him. One of the lessons that was learned from the MDGs, which ended in 2015, is that we never reached to the campus, number one. Number two is, we never used the digital technology, or ICT, which UNESCO talks about, which is an information and communication technology. We worked on an archaic way of achieving the MDGs. And in SDGs, we should not make the same mistake. This is what exactly the Jeff Sachs talked to me when I had a private conversation with him. There's a lot of volumes have been written. What are the lessons that we learned from MDGs? And I think those lessons have to be taken into consideration while implementing SDGs. We must reach to the campus that we talked about. That's why we are all here. But the way to approach it is by utilizing the digital technologies, the ICTs, in order to make sure that there is a transparent way of monitoring the data. The big data analytics, it ensures that, and also the blockchain, it ensures that you cannot manipulate the data. The machine tells you what it is. Of course, somebody can say that a machine, what it tells, you can interpret it in this different way. But this is what exactly is going to happen. The Smart Campus Cloud Network has a very simple way of registering the universities on a network by online. Once you register it online, then there is some protocol to be followed, in order that you follow the techniques of achieving SDGs with every action that you take in the campus. In the morning, I heard some of the people talking about that we have to reach and make the campus resource efficient, water efficient, energy efficient. But the we means not the administrators of the university. It has to be students. It has to be the faculty who has to work. And that core group has to work on a smart campus cloud network. And the cloud, which we have created, a dashboard that gives the information from one university to other university, what is the real-time online energy consumption, water consumption, and waste minimization. So it is a transparent method of learning by doing and learning by sharing. This is going to be important because we have very less time. Each one cannot do a learning exercise. It has to be done by sharing it and learning from the others. And that is another good feature of the Smart Campus Cloud Network. Finally, I would like to say that this particular Smart Campus Cloud Network is catching up everywhere. The Ministry of Human Resource Development of India is supporting it. University Grant Commission, ICSE for higher education, and the UNESCO in Paris are officially supporting the Smart Campus Cloud Network. And it is going to go very fast. There are already 71 networks which are on a dashboard, which are presently sharing the information with each other and accelerating our way towards the sustainable development. And that is an accelerated education on sustainable development is what going to matter a lot for every student. I would like to say a few words before I come to the end of my 10 minutes presentation, because I really would like to follow that discipline set by previous speakers. And our session, we would like to give an example how we can finish the session in an exactly given time. And I'm going to take that challenge with the help of chair and co-chair. Final thing we want to say is, there are some attractive projects that students would like to undertake. When I give lectures in a climate related issues. We say we have only 12 years left before we can take action to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees centigrade. 12 years. He says, how we can do it? I said, you can do it if you take the same challenge in your campus. So we have developed a program called as a carbon neutral campus. And the students like it. They think that their campus is a laboratory. Their campus is a laboratory for carbon neutral world, the decarbonized world. And they would like to take that challenge to show it to the world that they can become carbon neutral. And it is not difficult at all, luckily for the campus. Because campus has a defined border, and they can make that particular defined border entity decarbonized. There is one more advantage of working with a campus as a laboratory is that you have a captive audience of future policy makers. It is within the border. Is it within a border of campus? That is a captive audience which you will never get it anywhere except in an aeroplane. If aeroplane you are traveling for 3 hours and you address them, you have a captive audience. And they will all listen probably to you unless somebody is sleeping. But in a campus, you have a captive audience who can really listen, carry out the work, and if it is interesting, they will make sure that it makes happen. I don't think it's a question of pushing envelope. I think it's a question of pushing actions. And that actions can happen in a campus, because campus is where the minds of the future policymakers are molded, actions are achieved, they are prioritized, and the goals are galvanized, and the sustainability is safeguarded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I would like to welcome with us also Ms. Rama Al-Fitri, Senior Lecturer and Research Fellow. Thank you very much for joining us for this panel. Would you like to have your presentation now?
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm late because I was in the previous session presenting my research on water education there. Actually, I'm not really presenting here. I was appointed as a reporter for this session, but maybe I would like to add a little bit that it is, because I listened to your presentation only, I agree that the education can start from the campus, because in my university, also National University of Malaysia, we have also sustainable campus program, where this is like a living lab also for us to teach a student or to introduce the sustainable ecosystem in the campus, which also involve the water ecosystem, energy, efficiency, and even we have forests within our campus and how to conserve the forest ecosystem in the campus. And we have also waste management program within the campus, and which lead to the, if we teach the student, we educate the student properly related to sustainability, so it will reach to the achievement of the sustainable campus in the future. So that's all maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Professor Robert Donahue for his presentation.
I'd like to start around the tsunami of sustainability education. I think it's become a tsunami of experts who are increasingly downloading smart solutions and promises that are seldom realized. And speaking from Africa, where systems are beginning to fail and where government services are not being delivered, one of the dangers that we're facing is that the problem of the future is being downloaded to citizens, when it's often governments that are failing, and citizens should make the governments more accountable. So if we go to the recent UNESCO documents on evaluation, it actually turns it around. It doesn't want us to download things to communities. It wants to make governments accountable. So the evaluation should be communities assessing governance and seeing, are the SDGs appearing in policy, and then assessing policies to see how policies are delivering services to communities. And I think if we realize this, then we can actually turn around the tsunami and actually be much more on the ground. So there are 5 points that I'd like to make. The first one per minute, is that the UNESCO evaluation allows us to really start bringing in global citizenship education where the citizens are calling for accountability. Climate change is too much centered around fearful futures and the radical changes that have to happen. And what we are finding in Southern Africa is it's much calmer and future-orientated to start looking at seasonal cycle changes as opposed to the radical changes that need to take place. And then looking at changes in society that are actually deliver better to communities, especially around the green economy, because the green economy is coming through with many savings and many transitions that are proving to be quite effective. On the positive side now, as we move up, the partnerships that are occurring in Southern Africa are increasing. And I think that the emphasis on partnerships in this conference is very encouraging. Leaders are tending not to be government in Southern Africa, but tending to be universities and higher education. And I think that this is an important area to give some consideration to. In our own institute, we're looking at course-activated social learning in Amanzi for food and Fundisa for change, but there's not an adequate relationship between the government funding, policy, and implementation. So we're getting failures in the mechanisms that, of delivery, again, particularly in the African context. One more point is that local ethical action in community is coming out quite strongly, and I think this is very encouraging. And finally, and this is perhaps a little bit radical, is that sustainability education has been too centered, in my opinion, on trying to get people to learn to change. And I'm now a grandfather, and I've got 5 little grandchildren, and I'm learning a lot from them. And when you take children and you start thinking about ESD from an action learning point of view, they want to change and explore to learn, not be forced to learn to change. And I think we could really take this up. And I'm taking this up in my own garden, where I'm growing vegetables to see what happens. I'm not thinking about sustainability and growing vegetables, but growing vegetables to think about sustainability. And it's producing all sorts of healthy benefits. I'm also trying out small technologies to save money, because I've got more time to do that. I was in Ahmedabad last week, and I came across a wonderful way of making creamy curds. So I'm taking some pots back with me to be making creamy curds at home for my own health. And I'm also drying vegetables when there's a surplus. I'm making my own things with wood in a little workshop at home. I'm volunteering for the community, and I have an e-bike, and it's my favorite thing. I much prefer it to a car, because I can get around and I feel that I'm actually climbing the hill rather than using all the fossil fuels. So I think it's interesting to reflect on failures and experts and the need to kind of like shift our thinking slightly in many directions around the questions of sustainability education. And it mostly gets down to what we can do ourselves, what we can do together, and what we can do in our community context. And I think there's a lot to be learned and explored and opened up in those directions.
Thank you very much for this, and I'm really happy that you brought up the point about partnership, because even in this panel here, we are coming from so many different institutions with the different background, And it's actually a great opportunity to discuss how we can all partnership for this to have, to build this sustainable world and what we can do together. And that's a really great opportunity that we could meet here. And I would like to jump now to, to Dr. Juan Carlos Sandoval and ask for his presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I want to start saying that this is it's always a pleasure to be in India, not because the culture and rich all the things that you have here, but also because for Mexico it's a kind of mirror. Not only because we are in the opposite of the planet, but also because we share a lot of culture, biodiversity, but also we share some challenges that we have to face. I come from the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, which is a very rich area also in biodiversity and culture. I am part of the University of Veracruz, and we are offering two postgraduate programs there. One is a master and PhD in educational research in the field of environmental education. And I want to talk of these two programs because these two programs are my lab, my workspace for educational research experiments. I am working with students from Afro-descendant Mexican communities, with indigenous students, most of them women, and students that who comes from poor neighborhoods of big cities. We are trying to bring into the educational research in environmental education the perspective and the stories of exclusion that Afro-descendant communities, indigenous peoples, and people in disadvantage or from the margins of the economy or local economy are bringing into the education in the environmental education field. And I want to share some concerns and some perspective that we are working in these two postgraduate programs. But I will take the risk that saying that for us in this perspective, the sustainability approach for us has failed. Has failed because in our context, the efforts are focused more on the economic dimension than on the social and the environmental. And if we have a critical perspective on this, the environmental is supporting the social and the social is supporting the economy. We cannot divide these three dimensions with the base of environment, and that's why we think that for us in our context, the sustainability approach has failed. And we are moving the perspective from sustainability education to another perspective. I will tell you which perspective, but I want to tell you one story. During the Mexican Revolution, the revolutionaries, mainly indigenous peasants who fought against the injustice of the dictatorship in the early 20th century in Mexico, they left the battlefields when they saw that the food they had begun run out. They returned to the communities, planted food, grew food, and looked after them, and when they re-up and identified that they had enough food, they returned to the battlefield. The Mexican Revolution in this context lasted a total of 7 years. What is the learning of this story? That the revolution is important. The revolution for the indigenous peoples in the beginning of the 20th century was very important, but more important was to have food in our plates. This is the perspective where we are working on. Instead of sustainability education in the global perspective, what we are doing now is survival education, because we cannot avoid to point out that, for example, how the climate change, the impact of the climate change in vulnerable communities is arising now in different countries. And how can we teach about education for climate change where the climate change is impacting us in different levels in different countries? Education for survival or survival education in this sense is also for food production, access to water, sanitation, all these problems that they are not related to reduce the consumption, because the agenda now for us is not to reduce the consumption anymore, but how to access to water, how to access to energy, how to access to healthy food. And in our context, for example, in the Mexican context and also in the Latin American context, and this is something that we also share with Africa and with India and other South nations, is that we cannot deny our colonial past that still persists in practices of coloniality, that still persists in our daily routine. And it is important not only to point out that the historical perspective that is part of what we are nowadays, but it's important also to use a new, not new, but to bring into the discussion new, for us, theoretical perspective, that they are not coming from the North, from the Europe, from the people who has the theoretical discourses domain, but from theoretical inputs from the South, from the margins, and from people who have been marginalized during the historical development of the world. And I want to mention only three perspectives that we can discuss, and we can try to find if we can have some resonances in these post-colonial countries as Mexico and India. One is the perspective of the colonial discourses in the practice of education or environmental education, of survival education. As we know, the Western tradition of knowledge is grounded in positivism, the notion that risk is an objective and values-free activity that can make sense of humans and natural realities. We have different, in our context, with the diversity, the cultural diversity in our countries, different epistemological traditions which frames the way we see the world, the way we organize ourselves in it, and the question we ask and the solutions we seek. We are working also with indigenous emergent epistemologies. One example of this is the example of the African Hunu Ubuntu. We also have in Latin American perspective a lot of the Buen Vivir perspective from Latin America, which gives the centrality of to life, to biodiversity, to physical base of life. And we are also working with feminist theories. For example, one example is the feminists from the Margin Center Pedagogy of Bell Hooks. For example, Vandana Shiva with the Earth of Democracy, they give us some inputs and ideas to how to proceed. And the feminist perspective is very important because it's related with the love, it is related with care. And for example, we avoid to work with love in the academic production because it's something subjective, it's something that is not important to discuss. But for example, how can we work with people who is affected for the climate change? The people need love, they need love to move forward, to understand that we can care of them and they can care of us in this kind of relation of caring people for self, other, and surroundings, as Vandana Shiva says. And the other one, and this is most from Latin American perspective, the combination of emancipatory discourses with critical pedagogies from the South. In this sense, I want to mention all the influence that Paulo Freire has in our work and our perspective, where Paulo Freire said that the ultimate goal of education is the critical consciousness. And Freire explains that critical consciousness is a sociopolitical educative tool that engages learners in questioning the nature of their historical and social situation. The goal of critical consciousness, according to Freire, should be acting on subjects in the creation of a democratic society. In education, Freire implies intergenerational equity between students and teachers in which both learn, both question, both reflect, and both participate in meaning-making. I want to finish my intervention saying that in the political perspective of the Latin American tradition, I want to use one quotation of Fernando Birri, one Argentinian artist, who says, "Utopia is in the horizon. I walk 2 steps, and she walks away 2 steps, the utopia. I walk 10 steps, and the horizon runs 10 steps further. As much as I walk, I will never reach it. So, for what does the utopia works? For that, it serves to walk, to keep walking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this, and it was really inspiring. There were really inspiring discussions, and I would like to brought one point more into this presentations: the power of media. I was told before this conference that we are here almost 600 people, but we are all here because we are interested, we are educated. We know that there is dangerous things going on the world and we want to solve it, but we need to bring this message to all 6 million of people on this world. And this is also a part of journalists. Everyone actually today is a journalist. We are posting so many things on social media, messages and informations, but now we have to make it in a way that will reach to different audience, to the people that can understand, and we can turn to the actions. And this is also a perspective that I would like to take from the program that we are running, Young Reporters for the Environment. But this is a program that gives young students an opportunity to join, to learn, to educate, to make research, to interview stakeholders, and to present the problems in a positive perspective, through constructive journalism, through something that encourages local communities to take an action and change the reality. And that's what we are trying to do, and also involve the students in being leaders of change. Everyone now hear about small Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, but actually not so many of us is really following the messages that she's telling. We are impressed of this, that young student, small girl took an action, she started making strikes, and some students from other countries are following her, but still the communities are not listening what she's talking. And we need to emphasize all these messages, that's what I think, and we need to take this message because we don't need 100 people that makes things perfectly. Like we are here and some of them are having solutions for business, for things. We have to spread this message, and even with small steps, because we need the millions that will take small steps, but will change, will start changing the situation. And with this, I would like to open this panel for questions from the audience.
Yeah.
So just one break yet before we will have questions. We have another speaker that joined us online, Professor Daniela Tilbury. Yes. Maybe we should run with at least one question, and in a moment she's online, we can come back to that. I saw there was, yes, can we, yeah?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
She's there.
Okay.
Hi, Daniela.
Good afternoon.
This is Ram. So, welcome to this International Conference on Sustainability Education. And thank you so much coming over through Skype. There is a huge audience, almost 500-600 people, and a panel of great experts. Professor Ashok Kumar, Goshia, Dr. Rajan Shende, or many people, I would just request you one thing, because we are short of time, so kindly be very brief, 10 to 15 minutes at the max.
Okay.
So over to you.
Thank you. I'll run through my slides. Can you hear me? Can I check that you're hearing me? Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me just start by saying good afternoon and greetings from a very sunny, humid Gibraltar, which is celebrating its National Day. This is the reason why I'm wearing red, Gibraltar's national colour, and the very reason I cannot be with you today. I really wanted to start by thanking Dr. Boo, the organising team, UNESCO, and other partners for this conference, as well as their kind invitation. And my sincere apologies to the panel for having missed your own contribution to the conference. I'm sorry. Could we start with my first slide, please? Okay, thank you. The focus of my presentation is on promising futures, much brighter, healthier and inclusive future for all. The impulse for this ambition can be found in the 2030 Agenda and the accompanying Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you've been speaking of during the time of the conference today. These 17 ambitious goals aim at ending poverty, inequality, and protecting the planet, as well as seeking prosperity for all. What is important to note is that the education sector is very quick to commit to this agenda. Next slide, please. But although it was quick to commit, it is important to note, can you hear me? It is vital to see that the 2030 Agenda does not seek to increase awareness, but to change the world. And this is really important to note, because what we see is that education requires to change, so it can be the force for change. It is, I think the 2030 Agenda is important for a rethink of education, so that it can contribute to this better, more promising future. Next slide. I'm shortening my presentation because I've just been advised that I reduce time by a third. But substantially, there are three key questions that are important to address. The first one is understanding the challenge. The second is understanding change. And the third point I would like to make is the importance of learning for change. Next slide, please. So as I was saying before, I think education is making a mistake by considering sustainable development goals primarily thematic. We find this a great deal. We find that we're inputting content associated with key issues of sustainable development, but we are not necessarily rethinking the substance, the methodologies we are using to progress sustainable development. Ultimately, sustainability is about questioning the way we govern ourselves, the way we live, the way we work, and how this has an impact on people and planet. It is also about responsibility and action, a component that is often missing from a lot of the taught content that is increasingly being inputted to our education systems. We need to develop mindsets and skills that help us to anticipate, as well as create a much better and alternative future to the one we're facing today. Next slide, please. So a key question I pose to the audience today is, are our schools, colleges, universities mirrors that are reproducing the good and bad in our societies? Or are they beacons that are lighting up pathways for change for a much better society? And that's a key question for me, because we cannot mishmash our way to a better future. We have to redesign education, we have to rethink education, So a piecemeal approach by adding new components is not going to do the trick. It is not going to help education contribute to those ambitious sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. It's a little bit like John Grant expressed in his book, Green Marketing Manifesto. Definitely cannot put a lettuce in the window of a butcher shop and declare that you're now turning vegetarian. It's the same with our education systems. Just because we have added components that are relevant to sustainable development, some excellent projects, some piecemeal work, at the core of our agenda, the core of the teaching and learning remains the same, then we're not going to be shifting. We're not going to be expecting this major change in education. Next slide, please. I think this is a really important slide. It says, I expect you all independent, innovative, critical thinkers who will do exactly as I say. Here we are talking about an education system that's going to empower learners, that's going to encourage them to be creative and to not only problem solve their way out of existing issues, but consider new ways of working and living. And yet, the way we educate, the way we create learning opportunities does not enable these capabilities to be developed. Next slide, please. So as you can see, there is already a United Nations Economic Council for Europe framework that tries to cut beyond themes and identify 4 core agendas or areas that can act as lenses for us to review our curriculum. We need to learn to know. That includes knowing about new sustainable development issues, no doubt. But it also is about learning to know how these issues are connected. It's about learning to understand the causes of these issues. And that's missing often from our curricula. It's about learning to be. It's about acting, behaving, embodying the type of world that we want to be part of. And that's very tricky. We inherently have contradictions within our education system, within our society. So encouraging our students, our learners, to stop and think about how they can be coherent in their thoughts and actions is a substantial challenge. As is indeed learning to do. This is the action, the transformation, the engagement element of education for sustainable development. We need to look to ensure there are opportunities for students to learn, think through and participate in action, to learn from experience. But for me, perhaps that's lacking most from our education system is learning to live together. We've done a review of our sustainable support system in Gibraltar, and we have seen that there have been various attempts at incorporating a very engaging approach to sustainable development. But students, pupils are still struggling, learning to listen to others, learning to digest what they are hearing and integrate those into their thinking as they respond and act their own way going forward. So that is also a key challenge. So I think it's really important for us to step back and think about how our universities, our colleges, our schools, our informal education systems are learning to embrace a new way of thinking about education. Next slide, please. I'm including a couple of web pages where these ideas are elaborated further. Next slide, please. I want to reference Malala here in saying that Malala, spoke about the importance of education in killing terrorism, killing some of the ills in our society. But to really have an understanding of the power of education, we need context. The suicide bombers that attacked 250 people last Easter is a pointing question. The bombers were wealthy and educated people who studied in schools of high standing, went to university. Now, it begs the question, our education system has failed them. The education didn't tackle root causes. I know education can be a mirror of society and not solely to blame for some of the ills in our society. But we need to understand that education is not the solution by itself, that it requires a rethink, a redesign, but also to inform itself of the current context in which we're living in. Next slide, please. Again, I come to this question. Are our schools mirrors? Are we reproducing? Or are we lighting up alternative pathways for change? Critical question that I ask those engaged in education, including myself, to think, to reflect. What are the elements that push boundaries to help create that society? Next slide, please. And I think this is where we're failing. I think the intention is good. I think there's greater awareness of the need for us to create alternatives, to think in different ways. But educators are good at education, are learning to learn. What we don't have is an understanding of how we can be agents of change. So a lot of the training, a lot of the education for those engaged in education requires an understanding of change. Next slide, please. My argument here is that educators need to be supported to understand not just sustainable development, not just to review their own practice, but to understand how they can be agents of change in our education system. And I do believe the parallels can be drawn between the snakes and ladders in board game that has become so international, such a worldwide classic. There are snakes that divert our agenda. There are ladders that can help accelerate our work. And I'd like to draw those parallels a little bit more in the next slide, please. I think those who have sought to advance education for sustainability have experienced many obstacles in their path. And what's really interesting is that those who've been engaged in education for sustainability for 2 or 3 decades have learned strategies. They've learned tactics on how to be successful in embedding change in their institution, in their programs. But that embedding, that mainstreaming is not very widespread. Why? Because we've not learned to transfer the learning of how to bring about change in our education system. I think we need to learn to map the landscape we are embedded in, the education priorities, the social needs. We need to,
Professor Daniela, I think your talk is absolutely fascinating. We are really run out of time. I think other speakers had taken just about 7 to 10 minutes. So I hope you can just conclude this real quick. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
If you could conclude this in next minute or so, we would really appreciate. And then if there's a question, of course, you'll have more time.
That's fine. So I'll end with these 4 statements to say learning to map the landscape is important. Learning to understand the situation in one's own institution, in one's own department, in one's own group, in which the educator, the learner is embedded. But also learning to create tools, tactics, to be able to extend the longevity of initiatives that seek to bring about change. Because the system tends to rebound. It tends to reject anything that does not align with its core objectives. So very quickly, I'd like to say that for me, there are three very important points in terms of our way forward. Understanding the challenge, that it's not just about adding to our existing curricula, understanding change, and the role that educators and learners can play in it, and finally, the importance of training educators to learn how to embed that change in our system. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much.